Mormon Stories Podcast is a production of the Open Stories Foundation. All donations to Mormon Stories are fully tax deductible and go directly towards keeping the podcast alive and towards building a community of support for Mormons like you.
Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to an evening together with Mormon Stories. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to give everyone a hand. It's so fun to be here. It's a stormy evening outside, but we're really excited to have you here for this special event. Will Jim and Janice Robinson please stand up? So everyone look in the back. This is Jim and Janice Robinson. They're our hosts for the evening. Can we please give them a round of applause? I was fortunate enough to spend enough time with Jim and Janice, and specifically Janice, to know that Grant Palmer was a very important part of their story. Is that true? Do I remember correctly? So not only are we grateful that they're our hosts for tonight, but I'm grateful that we're bringing them something that hopefully is of value to them personally, as well as to the rest of you. Some of you will remember that we just recently had an evening celebrating Grant Palmer. How many of you were able to attend that? Raise your hands. And how many of you were able to listen to that online? Okay, a lot of you. Well, why are we doing another event? I guess there's two reasons. The first reason is, can you ever get enough Grant Palmer? That's fair. Is that fair? That's fair. You can? Here, hold that. Talk into that. What'd you say, Grant?
You can definitely get too much of me.
Just ask your wife, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Not here tonight.
All right. Do you need some water? Here's some water right here if you need it. A second reason is that Grant has a new book that's out. And when I talked to him about it being completed, I just thought what a great thing we could do to call everyone's attention to this important book and to have a chance to spend an evening with Grant discussing it. And then to record that episode for posterity. So I'm hoping, how many of you have had a chance to look at the book? Be honest, it's okay. All right. How many of you had a chance to read through it? How many of you brought some questions for Grant? No questions? That's my job, you're saying. No, please bring your questions. We also want to invite listeners on Facebook to post questions as well, and we'll try and get to them as we can. But I put out a call for questions and got hundreds. So we've got plenty of questions to go on. Plus, I've been reading through this book. So I like to give the date these days. It is August 9th, 2017, and we're excited to interview Grant Palmer about his book, Restoring Christ. So thanks for joining us. Quick announcements. I guess the bathrooms are behind us. So if any of you need to use the restroom, it's there. Want to thank Amy Grubbs and Sharon for organizing this evening. Let's give them a round of applause. And all of you for bringing food. Thank you. And Richard Holdman for manning our audio visual. Richard's always been awesome. So thank you, Richard, for being here. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about the book, and we're going to be asking questions to Grant. If I can be candid and maybe a tiny bit vulnerable, many of you will know that Grant is it liver cancer, Grant? Is that right? Talk into the mic if you can. Pancreatic cancer. All right, you get well. But Grant has pancreatic cancer and has been given weeks to months to live. And so that's another reason why we're here. And a lot of the questions that have come in are just about his perspectives as he's facing what he believes to be a fun experience on the other side. So we'll be able to talk to him about that as well. So thanks for joining us. And I guess I'll just say as a final moment of introduction that as I was talking to Grant about how to plan this event, he called my attention to 2 chapters in the book that are of particular interest and from his perspective represent a bit of breaking new ground in Mormon scholarship for those who are into Mormon history. So they're the final, as I recall, they're the final 2 chapters in the book. Do we have copies of the book here, Grant?
We had about 8 or 9, but they're all gone.
They're all gone. So for those of you who brought your copies, the beginning of our interview tonight is going to start on page 181. We're going to be talking about Joseph Smith and whether or not maybe he committed treason in his quest for political empire. And some of the new scholarship from this chapter comes from the Council of 50 Minutes that were recently released in full. Is that fair to say, Grant?
In the Nauvoo period.
Speak into the mic if you don't mind.
In the Nauvoo period, it came out. The church published it in 2015, and I'd already written an article on this for the John Whitmer Journal, but this added about a third to the chapter, and I was on the right track, but this is the church's own words, Brigham Young's own words, Joseph Smith's own words. So, in fact, I would go so far to say, excuse me, I don't think you can understand 19th century Mormonism unless you understand what went on in those 17 meetings with Joseph Smith and then another almost 24 with Brigham Young before they left Nauvoo. If you don't understand that background, you can't understand Mormon history in the 19th century. It's that important.
And you're referring to the Council of 50 meetings?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll get into that more, I'm sure.
So we're going to get into that chapter, and then we're going to talk about this, I guess, the penultimate chapter in this book. That's second to last, is that right?
Yes.
Chapter 19. Joseph Smith's practice of concubinage, polyandry, and polygamy. And what Grant says is kind of unique about this chapter is he's discussing for the first time what he calls in the chapter the blessing of Jacob. Is that what you're calling it? Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mentioned that Joseph keeps telling people he has the keys of Jacob. But remember, Jacob was both a polygamist and had concubines. And even many of our historians, as we sit here today, they don't understand that Joseph Smith was into concubines. They know quite a bit about polygamy and polyandry, but we're going to focus a little more on concubinage because this is dynamite.
So we'll talk about that. And we can also talk about the first half of this book, which is dedicated to, his thoughts, Grant's thoughts on sort of scuttling the Mormon Jesus, but embracing the Jesus of the Gospels of the New Testament. We can talk about that for those who are interested. And again, we can talk about any personal things as well. So please have your questions ready. Should we dive into the treason chapter?
I'd say so.
All right, so in chapter 18 of Restoring Christ, starting on page 181, Grant gives a little bit of context about the theocratic kingdom that is being set up through Joseph Smith and the Council of 50. Do you want to give us some context on this chapter?
Yeah, let's talk about that. In March of 1844, he organized a theocratic government within the United States government. This was an era of states' rights. They liked the Constitution, but they thought there was room for theocracy within the United States government. That's a strange notion to us today, isn't it? Because there were certainly precedents in the Whiskey Rebellion under Washington and so forth, that it wasn't okay, but that's why it finally dawned on them that he he organized his council of 50 men. He called them the princes of the kingdom, the 50 princes of the kingdom, and they were setting up cells throughout different areas of the United States and eventually the world to eventually overthrow the U.S. government, which Joseph Smith predicted would happen in a very, very few short years. And let me just go back a little bit. The first 100 pages of this book is on Jesus and Christianity, mainly academic essays, some devotional. But the last 160 are 10 chapters on Joseph Smith and Mormonism. And like I said, the cutting-edge research is in those last 2 chapters, and they represent about 70 pages of the book. But anyway, to get back to this focus, Joseph Smith called this by various names. For those of you who don't know much about it, and you probably don't, because first of all, I'm shocked that the church released these Nauvoo minutes. They had released the Utah Council of 50 Minutes, and they go clear up to 1890. That's when this Council of 50 was disbanded. And Joseph Smith was ordained king of the earth, and Brigham Young was ordained king of the earth, and John Taylor was ordained king of the earth in 1885. And Joseph Smith set it up for 2 or 3 purposes. One was to get him elected as president of the United States in 1844. The second was that they became disillusioned that they were going to have to get out of the United States. And so this Council of 50 sent out exploratory parties to Oregon, California, Wisconsin, Texas, and Salt Lake City. And when the LDS Church came in 1847, they were not part of the United States. They belonged to Mexico. So they were very interested in getting out of Dodge, so to speak, because they knew they couldn't practice their theocracy in the United States. That became crystal clear. As Brigham Young used to say, we love the Constitution, we just hate the damn rascals that administer it. And that is you can't understand phrases like John Taylor, the kingdom of God or nothing. He's not talking about a church, he's talking about a political overthrow of the United States government. So they called it a living constitution, these Council of 50 men, meaning they were the government. They were. And they were very bold. They sent this to all the rulers in England. They sent one to Queen Victoria saying the real kingdom's here and you're on the wrong track, Queen Victoria. I mean, they were very bold. And but if you don't understand what's going on here in those first 17 meetings and subsequent 20 meetings before the church left Nauvoo in February 2nd of 46, you cannot understand Mormon history in the 19th century. It's that important. And it still lingers. I don't know. I don't want to get... In the paper this past week, we had this very conservative Republican legislator say, I'm tired of the church whispering behind the scenes and not going through the front door like everybody else to get their legislation done. This is a throwback to that Council of 50. In the early state of Deseret, when they first came to Utah, the Council of 50 actually ran things. They had public legislators, but behind the scenes was the Council of 50 ratifying everything that was passed by the legislature, whenever that was. So this has been an ongoing thing, and for most of the 19th century, you had essentially a one-party system, and we still have that. And 88% of those Utah legislators are LDS, and I think half of them received a patriarchal blessing in their teens that said they're going to save the Constitution, so they go sign up. But there's only 61% of LDS in the state of Utah that identify themselves as Mormon. Half of those are inactive. So if you take the 40% that are not LDS and you add to the 30% that are, that's over 70%. It's time to, I think, to try to get the church to go through the front door and have more people run for legislature, because the 88% is not representative of the state of Utah. Was that too political?
You can say whatever you want. It's your night.
Yeah, I find as I get old, it needs to come to an abrupt halt. It's just been this way for so long. And this can be changed, and we have the majority to do it if people will just care enough to do it. I hope they will.
All right. So if you were on a stream of thought, I want you to continue. I have a place to start if you want. Is there something else you want to say before I...
Well, that's just kind of a general opening statement, but you really cannot understand Mormon history in the 19th century, Great Basin Kingdom centered in Salt Lake City, unless you understand this Council of 50. It's that important. And listen, these men, I give 3 examples of how they were trying to overthrow the United States government in this chapter. I don't know if anyone's ever done that before, but I've got 3. And we'll get more into the nuts and bolts of what they were trying to do and how they were trying to do it. But I lost it.
No, it's okay. I think it's probably valuable to start with the Book of Mormon passages that provide the foundation for their thinking on how they're going to overthrow the government. Now, I've got them here. Do you want to summarize them, or do you want me to read them?
It's too long to read the passages.
Okay. Do you want to summarize what basically the Book of Mormon prophesies about the Native Americans, the Lamanites?
One of the big things I noticed about Jesus and his end-time apocalypse is found in Matthew 24. He says, yeah, there's going to be great destruction and violence, but I'm not responsible for it. Now, go to the Book of Mormon, Jesus. Boy, he's gleeful almost about sinking 18 cities in 3 Nephi 9. And then you jump to chapter 16, 20, 21, Mormon 5, and you get this little summary. I'm going to summarize it. It goes like this. This is Whitey's land, and we're going to help you Native Americans get your land back. What we'd like you to do is listen to our missionaries and either join the church or make alliances with the Mormons. And when we get enough, we're going to declare war on the United States government. Unless the Gentiles repent, they can join us, but they're not doing too good a job at that. So that is the scriptural basis for this. What I didn't know is that Joseph Smith had himself ordained king, and he's going to lead the charge. And that's what he's doing. They are organizing dozens and dozens and dozens of Indian tribes, especially in the Texas territories from the Arkansas River clear to the Colorado River. Choctaws, Cherokees, Comanches, Sacs, Fox, Shawnee, Pawnee, dozens and dozens. And the idea is that if we can, that Brigham Young really gets strong about this. When Joseph Smith gets killed, in his view, the Gentiles have rejected the gospel. Even though they didn't put Joseph and Hiram to death, they consented to it. And therefore we have every right to sweep them off the land and destroy them. And Brigham Young really did believe that the Indians were capable of overthrowing the United States government along with the church members and so forth and so on.
And Grant, can I just read a little bit of the Book of Mormon passage?
Yes.
3 Nephi says, I say unto you, this is 3 Nephi 20, 15 through 17 and 20. I say unto you that if the Gentiles do not repent, Gentiles meaning whitey, as you call them, Then shall ye who are a remnant of the house of Jacob, which is who?
Native Americans,
Lamanites, go forth among them, and ye shall be in the midst of them who shall be many, and ye shall be among them as a lion among the beasts of the forest, and as a young lion among the flocks of sheep, who, if he goeth through, both treadeth down and teareth in pieces, and none can deliver. Thy hand shall be lifted up upon thine adversaries, and all thine enemies shall be cut off. And so the Book of Mormon is basically indoctrinating Brigham Young and others to believe that, looks like the Gentiles haven't repented. Looks like we need to get the Native Americans involved.
Yeah, they killed the prophets, so they've rejected the message. And that's when Brigham Young starts a very aggressive program to make alliances with the Indians. And boy, they're out there. It's a vigorous thing. And they are, surprisingly, none of these tribes bought into it. They're smarter than...
And some of and then you go on to provide quotes from people like Parley P. Pratt, Brigham Young, and others, where they're clearly trying to implement this prophecy.
And they're right out of the Council of 50 Minutes that was written by William Clayton, journals. He had 4 or 5 journals. The church still will not publish those journals. They published the minutes of the Council of 50, which were written by William Clayton. Joseph Smith told him to burn those documents, but he buried them. And that's the reason we still have them, because they dug them up. He brought them west. And we have those council minutes. The miracle is that the church leaders approved their publication. I have no idea why they did that. So I think the church... So whatever article I wrote for John Whitmer in 2012, I was on the right track, but this is just cemented it in their own words, in their own minutes. They can't run away from it. Every historian I know is shocked that they approved this. But the church employees were trying to get them to do it, and they prevailed, and they did it. And I don't know how they did it, but I'm glad they did it.
So I thought it was interesting the quotes that you have from general authorities who are sort of speaking about how to implement this prophecy in 3rd Nephi. So, for example, Parley P. Pratt writes, "And not only does this page set the time for the overthrow of our government and all other Gentile governments on the American continent, but the way and means of this utter destruction are clearly foretold. Namely, the remnant of Jacob will go through among the Gentiles and tear them in pieces like a lion among the flocks of sheep."
Their cities, their forts, everything. This isn't metaphorical. This is real.
Yeah, Brigham Young saying, "The Gentiles have rejected the gospel. They have killed the prophets, and those who have not taken an active part in the murder all rejoice in it and say amen to it. And that is saying that they are willing the blood of the prophets should be shed. The Gentiles have rejected the gospel, and we will sweep them out of existence." Council of 50 Minutes, 300. So what's going on there? It's kind of violent.
It's extremely violent, and it's not like the Jesus of the 4 Gospels. What is the Jesus of the 4 Gospels? Is bless those that curse you. This is not what's going on here. The behavior, the radical behavior of the Mormon Jesus in the Book of Mormon is very, very different than the Jesus of the 4 Gospels. I have a chapter in here on 2 different Jesus, and boy, they are different. And but again, the cutting edge research is on this chapter, and I've given 3 examples, and I don't know anyone's ever done that. So this is cutting edge research. And by the way, these 50 men, they had a stake in this. They're princes of the kingdom. So you get Lyman White, who's an apostle, member of the Council of 50. He goes down to Texas and sets up his little kingdom. And then you have Alpheus Cutler doing the same up in Missouri, Kansas. And then you have Joseph Smith in Nauvoo. And what's the thinking? Joseph Smith's king, but they have their own little fiefdoms. They have their own little kingdom, so that when Brigham Young goes west, who's reluctant to join Brigham in his Great Basin kingdom? Alpheus Cutler and Lyman White, because they have a stake where they're at. They're cells. They're supposed to build those. They got the commission from Joseph, not Brigham, and they are going to keep doing what Joseph asked them to do, which is, that's why they don't join Brigham. They end up getting cut off because they don't join Brigham Young's Great Basin theocratic kingdom. But the problem of Utah history has always been, it's not polygamy. That's the outward observant. It's a government within the government. And that's what every piece of legislation against the church in the 19th century. And it all started with Joseph Smith in March of 1844. So it is pivotal if you really want to understand Mormon history in the 19th century, and even today, and how they approach getting legislation is still with us.
I thought it was interesting you mentioned Lamanites or Native Americans being mentioned as visiting the city of Nauvoo and showing up in relation to these Council of 50 Minutes. Can you just talk about that really briefly?
Well, Joseph Smith's having all kinds of powwows there. They're bringing in cannon and hogsheads of sugar. They're bringing in ammunition. They're getting ready to do this. And Wilson Law is the brother of William Law, who had just been recently released from the first presidency. Highest ranking, most important member to ever left the first presidency, in my view. But Wilson Law is a major general in the Nauvoo Legion. And he knows if they pull this off, they're going to hang him for treason. So he bows out. But they're bringing in Indian tribes, and nobody knows why. By the way, if you remember this Council of 50, you know what your punishment was for revealing anything in those meetings? Beheading. Some of you will know what that means from the temple. And
stop making the signs and penalties back there. No, I'm kidding. No, it's fine. We're among friends.
But this is real. The main goal of this Council of 50, and they're very confident, is to overthrow the United States government in a very short few years. And Joseph Smith predicts this more than once, twice, more than 4 times. But it's to find a toehold outside of the United States, and also 3, get him elected as president of the United States in 44. And we won't go into that. But these 3 examples, I think my second example is Alpheus Cutler up in Missouri, Kansas. That's where Andrew Jackson sent all the Indians. They're all down there, and the church thinks it's fertile ground, and they've got them organized to overthrow Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. They said, we can overthrow this in 4 hours. This is a fort, this Leavenworth, Kansas, same fort today. They're ready to go. Now back on Wilson Law a minute. So Wilson Law, Joseph Smith was the lieutenant governor. He wanted to be the general, but because it wasn't a standing army, it was a militia, the governor of Illinois, even though he had a liberal charter, wouldn't make him a general. But right under him was Wilson Law, and he's the one that ran things. And boy, he could see the handwriting on the wall. And he knew if they executed this, he would be hung for treason. So he quit. He left along with his brother. All fits in.
If it's okay, I'm going to read a little bit more from the Council of 50 Minutes. Just to talk again about the Indians, the Native Americans, talk about how Texas plays into this. You write on page 191, in March 1st, 1845, Minutes, Council of 50 member Louis Dana, an Oneida Indian, who reportedly was an interpreter to 6 tribes and acquainted with nearly all the tribes, was appointed to take a small expedition to all the tribes in this vast area, especially to Texas territory. Dana was advised to, quote, call upon the red men to come speedily to the help of the Lord against the mighty Gentile nation. Let him carry the fire amongst to them and tell them that God has set up his kingdom and that the day of deliverance is at hand. Brigham Young predicted, quote, there are millions of the Lamanites who, when they understand the law of God and the design of the gospel, are perfectly capable of using up these United States. They will walk through them and lay them waste from east to west.
Yeah, and by talking about this chapter tonight, you know more than
99.9%
of the members.
So you made a reference to this before, but how successful were they in recruiting the red man, so to speak?
Well, the modus operandi was, like I said, this following summary: try to convert them. If you can convert them, make alliances with them. And when there's enough Latter-day Saints and Indian tribes, try to move on to their reservations to get a foothold and to influence them to gin them up for overthrowing the government. That's the operation. And that's what they're doing. And the very fact that the Lamanites didn't join in this, they had more sense, probably prevented the leaders of the LDS Church from committing treason. But my good friend D. Benson, who was in my neighborhood, I had him read an earlier chapter. He says, well, they certainly would have spent time in a penitentiary for conspiracy to commit treason. And I think they would, or something along those lines. He's a chief federal judge. I think they rotate that. He's not, but anyway.
Yeah. And I'll just make if it's okay, I'll make a quick commentary. How many of you remember the Brent Metcalf interview that I did years ago? Okay. So talked a lot about, Book of Abraham and Mark Hoffman. Really cool interview. Definitely one of the top 10 or 20 Mormon Stories interviews ever.
He's about as bright as they get.
Yeah. He made a comment that's never really left me. When we were talking about the historicity of the Book of Mormon, and I was focusing on steel and horses and other sorts of things, Brent called to my attention what he feels is one of the most condemning problems with the Book of Mormon. And it's that on the title page, the Book of Mormon tells you who it's written for and to. Who is it written for and to?
Lamanites.
Lamanites. And if you think about this incredibly violent text and plan that's coming out of the Council in 50 Minutes, to the church's credit, it shows that Brigham Young and others were reading the Book of Mormon and taking it very literally. So if the Book of Mormon is for the Lamanites, they're sending missionaries out to the Lamanites, and then, of course, they're trying to recruit the Lamanites to overthrow the government because it's in the Book of Mormon. You realize how central the Lamanites, the Native Americans, were to all of Mormon doctrine.
Yep.
And then you think about Spencer W. Kimball and in my childhood and how he couldn't shut up about the Lamanites, right? Well, that's why, right? Because what's the purpose of the Book of Mormon as a keystone of Mormonism if you ignore the core audience for whom it was written and many of the core prophecies that are laid out in it?
It's worse than that. They don't even know who a Lamanite is.
Yeah, we don't know who they are anymore.
Where's a Lamanite?
And that's the whole...
Find one. We got to have one be a foreman of this city of Temple of Independence. They can't even find one.
And that's sort of like what I'm trying to say is that not only did none of these prophecies come to pass regarding the Lamanites helping overthrow the government, which is in the Book of Mormon, but now we don't even know who the Lamanites are. We don't even talk about them anymore.
But it's written for them.
Great
insight by Brent, by the way.
Yeah. So just to summarize, you're suggesting, and I think you're trying to use cautious language in saying this suggests that maybe Joseph Smith and his supporters might have committed treason. Do you want to just summarize that point and to kind of close out this chapter?
I think what prevented them was the Lamanites. They didn't buy into it. But they committed, listen, in the Aaron Burr trial in 1800, whenever it was, he got off, he conspired to commit treason, but he didn't commit treason. And Chief Justice John Marshall, which is Jefferson's cousin at the time, there wasn't any statutes for conspiracy to commit treason. You either did it or you didn't. That's why Aaron Burr got exonerated. But as I recall, by the time of what Joseph Smith's doing, John Marshall put the conspiracy to commit treason. These leaders in the church would have spent time in a penitentiary. There's no question about it in my mind. And or something along those lines, because I'm not a lawyer, but D. Benson is, and that's what he tells me, and I believe him.
All right. Any burning questions about Council of 50 Minutes? Come up here. You're going to have to ask to the microphone if you want to ask a question. So if you want to come form a line right now, we'll just ask a couple quick questions. Yeah, if that's okay. If you don't want to be on camera, you can just...
Hi. You mentioned that during the Nauvoo period and the Council of 50 that they were trying to recruit the Indians to overthrow the government. Are you suggesting that was still carried over when they came to Utah, and that they were still doing that with the Utah Indians?
You know, that's a good question. I don't have any knowledge of that, even though Western history and Utah history is one of my many focuses in my 3 studies in history.
We certainly know that the Mountain Meadows Massacre, somehow they were thinking about Indians as being a part of what they did there.
That's a good question. Someone needs to write a paper on that, but I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you.
So the Book of Mormon was written long before Brigham Young and like the passages that you guys were explaining about.
Well, 1830, if you think Smith wrote it. So
the church has some history of doing self-fulfilling prophecies where they're kind of doing that. Do you think that that's a case of that, or what do you think would cause Joseph to write those type of passages within the Book of Mormon?
You know, do you have an opinion on that? I don't really know. All I know is it's in there in spades. It really is. You can read chapter 16, chapter 20, chapter 21, Mormon 5 of 3rd Nephi, and it's in there in long, long passages. It's not just a footnote and a phrase. This is an integral part of the predictions of what the Book of Mormon is going to.
Is it fair to say that, you know, right now as Indians have been sort of annihilated, Native Americans have been annihilated en masse and sort of constricted to their reservations, that we all see it as an obvious foregone conclusion that we won? But is it possible that in the frontiers of the early 1800s, maybe it wasn't so sure how expansion would have worked, and so there would have been a lot of anxiety about will the settlers survive? Will the Europeans win? Will the Native Americans win? And so that could have been a culture for which people are thinking about, you know, whitey versus Native American.
Certainly more then than now. Nobody worries about an uprising from the Indians.
But back then, would that have been on their minds?
Oh, yes.
And so if you combine this idea, where are the last 10 tribes? Where are the last 12 tribes? View of the Hebrews, you know, all this fascination with the origin of the Native Americans. So you've got that. You've got that they're the pure blood of Israel. So you've already got that. Then you've got them here. You add to that worry about who's going to win, Native Americans versus the European settlers.
Or how they can be used to win. That's Joseph Smith's approach.
Right. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but it would be a good topic for researchers to investigate. Yeah. Who knows, maybe the late war or some of these other texts or texts we haven't yet discovered can provide some inspiration for why he had that fascination.
It's 3rd Nephi that's the driver behind all this. It's scripture, according to Mormons. It's not something you can, this is speculation, we can run away from it. No, this is part. And Parley P. Pratt, I think, goes on to say, if this doesn't happen in 5 years, the Book of Mormon isn't even true. This was 1838.
When you were doing your research, Grant, did you look at any intertwining of Smith's comments that he wanted the intermarrying going on to have a pure seed? Was that intertwined with any of this?
Well, that gets into a little more complicated problem. In 1831, Ziba Peterson, Warren Parrish, Ezra Booth, who's a recently joined minister to Mormonism, Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, went down to try to proselyte on the Indian nations down there. And they find out you either had to bribe people to get on the tribe or you had to be a relative. There's only 2 ways you could get on the... So Brigham Young is saying, Joseph Smith is saying, well, what did he say? It'd be okay for the single men to probably marry the Lamanites. It may be how they become a white and delightsome people, although that's not what the text of the Book of Mormon says, and you've done interviews on that recently that have been very offensive to some Lamanites you told me about. They thought their skin was going to turn white and using all kinds of letting their hair grow and wearing long sleeve shirts because of one woman was so embarrassed that she wasn't turning light and therefore she's a sinner. Anyway. So Ezra Booth, he came home and immediately wrote 11 letters. He doesn't say one word about marrying the Lamanites. 30 years later, W.W. Phelps, who's part of that party, literally 30 years later says, well, Joseph Smith was talking about marrying Lamanites for single men, but it wasn't polygamy. If you read the caption heading of section 132, it makes it sound this was like the beginning of polygamy, but it wasn't. William Booth wrote these letters, and he was there, and he wrote it contemporary, and he doesn't mention anything about polygamy. I'd go with him over W.W. Phelps saying it was about polygamy 30 years later. The church is trying to protect themselves. I don't know if that fully answers that question.
That was good. And just to read the quote from Parley P. Pratt, who's talking about Joseph Smith's prophecy, says that there will not be an unbelieving Gentile upon this continent 50 years hence, and if they are not greatly scourged and in a great measure overthrown within 5 or 10 years from this date, then the Book of Mormon will have proved itself false.
That's the thinking. But Parley P. Pratt, okay, he's an apostle, big deal, but 3rd Nephi you can't run away from.
All right, thank you for your questions about the Council of 50. If you feel like that was not enough detail, buy the book, check it out, check out his sources. Thanks to the Joseph Smith Papers Project, you can read the Council of 50 Minutes online. You can cross-reference Grant's citations and investigate this for yourself to prove if it's true or not. Let's move on to concubinage. Is that all right? You guys ready for some concubinage? All right. So, what I think is sort of central to this is giving some context about the Old Testament, Joseph's understanding of it, and this notion of the restoration of all things. Grant, do you want to start there? Is that okay?
Well, the linchpin of the doctrine is in section 132. Joseph says he has an appointment, quote, an appointment to restore all things. And then he says, and this includes concubines and plural wives. So there's the hook. He's on the hook right there. And then he proceeds to, I think he starts out with concubines. And a concubine, it's not...
Actually, can I jump in?
Yes.
He doesn't totally start with concubines.
No.
He starts with the the second interview that I do with Grant on Mormon Stories, the first was about his book, An Insider's View of Mormon Origins, which if you haven't read, you need to read. The second interview that I did was about sexual allegations against Joseph Smith that really have nothing to do with polygamy or concubines, possibly. So you can refer to that episode if you want, but why don't you give us the 1-minute version of the beginning of this chapter, which is just about Joseph Smith's problems with sexual allegations.
Well, Joseph Smith is accused during a 16-year period by women in 5 different states of making untoward sexual advances towards them. And you can say there's no fire there, but I wouldn't want to be accused of that by 16 or all these women in 5 states over a 16-year period. And then he shifts into high gear and he gets into the plural marriage and so forth and so on. So this seems to be his MO. I don't know, he's just an extraordinary person, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, maybe he had a high libido, right? So.
Oh, yeah.
So, we've got all these allegations.
Lots of ambition. Oh my gosh, this man has ambition.
So it seems like you kind of merged together that essay that we had discussed previously into this chapter, and that becomes the backdrop. And so it sort of goes from Joseph's understanding of the Old Testament, this idea of a restoration of all things, and if Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had not only plural wives, but also concubines. Well, we've got to restore all things. Okay, we got to restore all things. We have his history of untoward sexual advances, and then you've got sort of part 3 of this book, which is from concubinage to polygamy. So talk about how he maybe, in your theory, he progresses from concubinage to polygamy.
Well, the first thing is that he calls this, he has different classes of women. It's important to remember. And at least 2 of those classes are concubines and plural wives. He calls this his spiritual wife system. Sometimes it's shortened to spiritual wifism, sometimes to spiritual wivery. But this is what he's doing. And some of the apologists have said, oh, this was all about John C. Bennett. He started that, him and William Smith, brother and apostle. But they're inaccurate because we know, there's a footnote in here you should read. It's on the 2nd or 3rd page that Joseph Smith uses the term spiritual wife system, as does Brigham Young, after William Bennett is excommunicated from the church and leaves Nauvoo. So we know that it's part and parcel of what they called at Nauvoo. Helen Mar Kimball, one of his plural wives, says so. So does one of the...
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, if you wish.
Joseph Smith said he received from God, quote, an appointment to restore all things, which included having, quote, many wives and concubines, end quote. The term used to describe these 2 different classes of women was called a spiritual wife system or spiritual wifism. Many have attributed the use of this phrase exclusively to the practices of Bennett and others, but this is not accurate. In 1882, Helen Mar Kimball Smith, Whitney wrote that in Nauvoo, quote, spiritual wife was the title by which every woman who entered into this order was called. Emily Partridge wrote that, quote, spiritual wives is what they called it in those Nauvoo days. Joseph Smith himself in 1844 called it a, quote, spiritual wife system, according to the Nauvoo City and High Council minutes, as did Brigham Young. So, yeah, we can't just lay that on John C. Bennett.
No, and they try, because they always try to protect Teflon Joseph, you know. I think it's really important. Listen, there's hardly any historians that know about the concubines. One of the very, very few is Carmen Hardy, and he's a dang good historian. He says that concubinage received such a negative, such a pejorative term that they just quit talking about concubines. That's why nobody knows about them. And And they just, he says, but he put them in different classes of women, and that at least those two, maybe polyandrous is the third category. I don't know. We're not at the bottom of this yet. But I can tell you that most of our historians don't know about this concubinage stuff. And they just quit talking about it being concubines and call them all honorable wives. And that's the way it went down with Brigham Young. But this is what's going on. It starts out as sexual allegations. And by the way, Joseph Smith said that he did some things that he wasn't very proud of, but he never says what it is. Everybody thinks it's masturbation or something. I don't know. But he is what? Lost that one.
In part 3 of this chapter, what you basically do is you list a number of women who you suspect counted as concubines. So I'll read their names.
7 of them.
7 women. You have Lucinda Morgan Harris.
Definitely a concubine.
Sarah Pratt.
Concubine.
Mary Heron Snyder.
Definitely.
Melissa Schindel. Catherine Fuller Warren. Nancy Rigdon. Sidney Rigdon's daughter. Mary Clift. And those are the women. Are there any stories or events of note regarding these 7 women that you want to either mention or you want me to try and read from?
You can do that, but in Nancy Rigdon's case, she's 17-year-old daughter of Sidney Rigdon, his counselor, and he wants her so bad that he's willing to either marry her as a plural wife and let her marry anybody else she wants, as long as Joseph can have her as a concubine on the side. He's given her a choice. He says, I have the sealing power. I can do what I want. And this kind of goes to his head, so to speak.
You're right.
I can seal, I can unseal, I can seal you up to eternal life or damnation. I think we should say one thing more before you do any reading. Another way of looking at this is, what's the difference between a concubine and a plural wife? First of all, there is no command from God in the Old Testament to any prophet or king to ever practice concubinage, polyandry, or plural marriage. This is all Joseph Smith. And I'm just amazed that some of my relatives think, oh, you're going to be left out. Nobody. There's no prophet in the Book of Mormon that says you have to even be married to get to the city of God. So why do we think that Joseph Smith is the cat's meow and the last word on this thing? You have to be a polygamist to get to the highest degree of the celestial kingdom.
Because of modern revelation.
Yeah, but it's irrational it just doesn't hold up at all. So anyway, but here's another way of approaching this. A concubine is not just a mistress. Okay, you could easily fall into that trap. What Joseph Smith is doing, he's getting a revelation that it's okay to sleep with so-and-so. So he has a revelation, then he presents the revelation, and when he gets her consent, then they have an ongoing dalliance. There's no commitment to these women. And Joseph is not practicing concubinage like Abraham and Jacob did. You can read, there's obligations of Jacob and Abraham towards their concubines. Not so with Joseph Smith. So that's what a concubine is. That's not a plural marriage as established in Nauvoo. In Nauvoo, you've got to have a ritual. You've got to have Joseph Smith's priesthood permission. You've got to have witnesses. You've got to have a ritual. You've got to have all of these things, and he makes it the crowning doctrine of his theology. And if you turn me down, young lady, your whole family will go to hell. And if you do accept, your whole family is in, which to me violates the atonement of the Mormon concept of exaltation. So this is a major difference. And Sarah Pratt comes along and says, well,
you want to read it?
Yeah.
She's basically saying, and this is through John C. Bennett, which I have to ask you about. Smith is reported as saying, Sister Pratt, the Lord has given you to me as one of my spiritual wives. I have the blessings of Jacob, which is code word for what? Concubinage. Granted me.
Spiritual wife system is part of that. Plural wives, concubines, all part of spiritual wife system, different orders of women.
And I have the blessings of Jacob granted me, as God granted holy men of old, and as I have long looked upon you with favor, and an earnest desire of connubial bliss, I hope you will not repulse or deny me. Connubial bliss.
Anyway, you can read those 7 examples there. But what is important going forward there is that Joseph Smith stands up in Nauvoo in that grove. If you've been down just below the temple, there's a grove of trees. And he tells the saints what his sexual philosophy is and the importance of secrecy. He says it's okay to do this as long as nobody catches you. That's where he's at. And if you don't have any accusers, okay. And then we have contemporary sources by women who talk about this. We have late sources and we have contemporary sources. And those 7 examples show that Joseph Smith is into concubines. I think he starts out with just sexual allegations and affairs and maybe concubines. And then he morphs into concubinage, and then he goes into plural wives. But as Sarah Pratt says, just because, and Bennett is not an ideal source, you understand that?
That's what I was going to ask you. Is it credible to be using him at all? I can see Brian Hales not liking that very much.
No, in fact, Brian Hales accuses Smith or Sarah Pratt and Bennett of having a clandestine affair, but there's no evidence for it. He should stick to anesthesiology.
But how can you use Bennett as a source? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, there's so much of it, and again, it comes through, I have prayed about this, you're the one. He says this in 7 or 8 of these cases. It's in italics. But it's his philosophy. Whether it's Bennett's philosophy or not, Joseph Smith owns it. He endorses it. And when they start excommunicating people who are involved in these concubine relationships, they're right contemporary sources, and it fits what Joseph Smith is saying. They says, well, it's okay as long as you don't have any accusers, just what Joseph Smith said in the Grove, as recorded by Apostle Wilford Woodruff and in the history of our church.
Let me read that. Is that okay? So this is Wilford Woodruff's journal, History of the Church.
Which is based a great deal on a history of the church, that source.
Smith said, if we did not accuse one another, God would not accuse us. So in other words, if you had sex with someone but there was no accuser, no harm, no foul. If we had no accuser, we should enter heaven. He would take us there as his backload. If we would not accuse him, he would not accuse us. And if we would throw a cloak of charity over his sins, he would over ours. For charity covered a multitude of sins, and what many people called sin was not sin. And he did many things to break down superstition, and he would break it down.
Amazing.
Boy, did he break it down.
He bought and owned what Bennett may have started. Bennett was a renegade. He was doing this before he came to Nauvoo. But Joseph Smith bought and owned the philosophy, and that's one of the quotes that establishes that very well. I don't think you can run away from that quote either.
One useful thing you do at the end of this chapter is you also list a lot of the apologetic tactic, which boggles my mind really, is to say, okay, maybe Joseph Smith did have lots of wives, but he didn't have sex with all of them or with most of them or only had sex with a few of them. And with the polyandrous wives, there's no evidence that he had sex. That tactic makes no sense since all post-Joseph polygamy involves sex. Well, why would we be insistent that Joseph didn't have sex when every other instance of polygamy that we know, sex was integral?
It says right in section 132 that the main purpose of polygamy in this life is to raise up a righteous seed. So if they're not doing it, they failed.
Right. And what you do is a really helpful part of this chapter at the end is you list at least 7 or so instances, 7 or so wives where Joseph actually did. There's good evidence that they actually did.
Oh, they're under court oath.
Depositions, right?
Yeah, they're under court oath. This isn't a theory, folks. This is 11 or 12 women that are speaking up. I had carnal intercourse with Joseph Smith in the mansion house and in my father's house, and how can you miss it?
So Helen Mar Kimball says it was more than ceremony. Isn't it nice, the euphemisms that they use to describe connubial bliss? Talks about Sylvia Sessions thinking Josephine was Joseph's daughter. Why did she think that? They make a joke with Eliza R. Snow that she didn't have sex, and Eliza jokes, quote, "I thought you knew Joseph better than that."
That was Angus Cannon, who was an LDS stake president. Clueless.
Melissa Lott says that she roomed with and was Smith's wife, quote, "in very deed." Almera Johnson says she lived with Joseph as his wife. At my house as man and wife. Eliza Partridge. Emma found Joseph secluded upstairs in the mansion house with Eliza Partridge and was much irritated. That's probably a little euphemistic as well. Emily Partridge said she roomed with and slept with and had, quote, carnal intercourse, quote, end quote, with Joseph, so on and so on. So if you want a really quick list of evidences that there actually was getting busy with it going on, you've got that in this book.
And you have to understand that a lot of these women, this is the Victorian age, they don't like to talk about their sex life. But enough of them did. We don't know that he had sex with everyone. Some of these apologists think if he only had sex with 10 instead of 20 that he's okay or more righteous. It's silly. Any questions for Grant regarding concubinage, spiritual wifery? Just come on right now. You got to speak to the microphone. For listening, if it's okay. For the recording.
I've heard recently that some of the defense of why he didn't was that none of these women ever had any children. Do we know anything about that?
I think that's pretty much true, but I have a little section here on Nauvoo abortions. And some of it's late, and some of it's contemporary. And it's like a page and a half in there, and there were so few children, they'd call them spiritual children. If you were a concubine or a plural wife, and there's so few in Nauvoo, and we've wondered why. The answer may be abortions, but quite frankly, we don't have enough evidence to pin this on Joseph. The implications are there, but you have to be objective. We don't have enough information, but there's 2 or 3 sources that say they would either send them out of town to have an abortion. The Dr. Bennett would use drugs, and he had a tool that fit an abortion tool of that era. And it's described to Sarah Pratt and to Orison Pratt, who was an apostle who was disaffected at the time. And this might be one of the reasons there's so few, but we haven't got that pinned down yet. We have to be more objective about that.
Other questions about this chapter? Please come to the microphone if you don't mind.
We see mind your own business as a Mormon motto in early Utah. if people in Nauvoo had been suspicious that perhaps Joseph had a relationship with someone they knew, or maybe that relationship was perhaps even in their home, maybe while they were not there or asleep, would they be practicing the mind your own business, or was that a later development?
Well, it was so secret. You have to understand that, look, Nauvoo proper had just about 12,000 people. Chicago had, in the 1845 census, had about 11,000. It was bigger than Chicago. And then you had another 6,000 outside of the city limits of Nauvoo. 18,000 people. You know how many knew anything about this? Probably several hundred. This is a hush-hush deal. So people aren't knowing it. I'm not sure how to answer that question beyond that, except you did mind your own business, all right. I don't know when that started, probably before we were long ago.
Just as I was trying to distill my thoughts on the Book of Mormon and Lamanites from Brett Metcalf stuff, for me, as I try and distill this whole polygamy thing, and there's a lot of people who know a lot more than me about this, a couple things we should all try to keep in mind, and you keep me honest if I'm missing some of the details. The first is that Joseph's first plural wife was who? Fanny Alger. And she comes...
No, we don't know that.
Well, we don't know for sure, but
could be.
She's the first one that
either an affair or a concubine.
Well, what I'm saying is, we do know this, that Fanny Alger comes before the sealing power was actually given to Joseph Smith.
That's why Joseph Smith in section 132 likes to say that 31 was the beginning of polygamy, because even apologists are saying that he married her between 33 and 35. Well, there's no sealing power, as understood by the LDS Church, until April 3rd, 1836, in the Salt Lake Temple, or in the Nauvoo Temple. So I don't know. There's no cogent evidence that he's married to her. I mean, she runs off and marries a non-member. That's not what plural wives do.
And then, am I correct in saying that the Nauvoo polygamy began before Section 132 was actually...
Oh, yeah, that's...
So we've got Nauvoo polygamy already starting before D&C 132 happens.
The first documented sealing, as far as we know, was identified by several sources. Sarah Pratt one, but others. It was on April 5th, 1841. 3 months after Sarah Pratt turned down Smith, and then he streamlined his Nauvoo polygamy and made it the centerpiece of his doctrine and theology. By the way, what you've learned tonight on this, most of our historians don't even know about this yet. It will be coming.
And the only other thing I was going to say is that then D&C 132 comes, it's got all those threats against Emma. And where was Emma in the sequence of being sealed to Joseph?
She's number 21. She finds out that Joseph has 21 wives. Her and William Law, about June of 43.
So in what universe would it be okay for Joseph's first wife to be the 21st wife sealed to him?
And she doesn't even know about it unless she caught him. And she did catch him several times.
And doesn't that violate the law of Sarah in D&C 132 that basically requires the first wife?
They weasel out of that. The law of Sarah is that you are supposed to tell your wife, but if she rejects it, you can do it anyway. So it's a cop-out.
But you put all this together in addition to the early sexual allegations, I think it kind of completely neglecting just the ethics of women being treated as cattle and as sort of being a dime a dozen to men as property.
And a part that's not particularly new in there, but it's Joseph Smith uses almost any highly questionable message to procure a concubine, and if he can't get a concubine, he'll make her a plural wife. I'll take either one, he says, whatever works. and my gosh, the stratagems he used, there's about 6 pages on that, and it just goes on, and he always threatens these women. He says, if you turn me down, I won't do anything. But if you go public, I'm going to call you a whore. And boy, he does. Right in the church, Nauvoo newspapers, and everywhere else you can think. And I've got, I think, 8 documented cases where he's you probably know this part of it, but he gives them 24 hours. He uses the thing, well, an angel is going to slay me if you don't marry me. You wonder if that angel knew anything about the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor. I mean, he's breaking the commandments. William and Jane Law says they were appalled. He broke 6 of the 10 Commandments. And I talk about that briefly in there. But he's using all kinds of stuff in there. And there's so much of it. Even some of these apologists don't know how to answer it. They like to say, well, Martha Brethington later was good friends with the church or something. But what do you do about the other 7? He's out there calling them nasty names. He says, they'll believe me over you. And he was right. And when they go to these church courts in Nauvoo in 1842, all these people are tried except William and Joseph Smith. The Smith family gets a pass. And he didn't do anything. He's not among the... They throw John Bennett under the bus and everyone else, but they don't throw the family under the bus.
All right. So I think a final question about polygamy or concubinage.
Do you suppose that Joseph Smith's sexual drive has more to do than just his libido? And maybe for John, is it like an ICD-10 code for that? Is there a diagnosis for something like that? Or is it just a...
Yeah, it's called a sexual predator.
Okay.
You don't see Jesus doing this kind of stuff in the New Testament. He attacks the religious hypocrisy of leaders. He's protecting the vulnerable. He's not doing this kind of stuff. And so Joseph Smith, these revelations from Mormon Jesus and practiced by Joseph Smith, this is a radical change from the behavior, character, and God of Jesus in the New Testament. They are nothing alike. And that's why I say in the preface, he's not worth saving. The Mormon Jesus, we need to call it for what it is. And look, Joseph Smith writes up all these scriptures, calls them ancient, and we know he gets them right out of his 19th century. What kind of a guy does that? He's marrying, or he's marrying teenage girls, and he's 37. He's trashing women who publicly oppose him. He's marrying married women. He has himself ordained king. He's going to go after his enemies. He's going to violently overthrow this nation. You show me where that's Jesus in the New Testament, and you can't really find it. You can find it in the book of Revelation, and I have a few things to say about that too.
All right. So if that's okay, that concludes our discussion of polygamy, concubinage, polyandry, etc., connubial bliss. How you doing on time, Grant? You got some more time? We're good? Okay.
You want to shut it down?
No, you guys, can we go a little bit more? Is that okay? All right. So the next round of questions, let's go ahead. Okay. So we have the situation with Elder Hamula. Yesterday it was announced that a very senior member of the LDS Quorum of the 70, former, one of the leaders in the church history department and recently learned head of the correlation committee for the church, yesterday was excommunicated, or at least it was announced that he's been excommunicated from the church for unspecified reasons, except to say that while the church doesn't comment on disciplinary councils, they're not only telling us that he's been excommunicated, but they're also telling us why he wasn't excommunicated. He, according to the church, was not excommunicated for matters of apostasy or disaffection, which of course leaves us all to speculate as to what he was excommunicated for. And I'll go on record saying that I think excommunication, the practice, is barbaric and medieval and revolting and disgusting.
Especially
and
for
sad.
people who want to stay in like you and I did. And they go after you anyway, and look at the damage.
But also the public feeding frenzy of speculation and rumors and innuendo and slander. I went through it, and I didn't even do anything that merited that. I still got it, and it was awful. Well, so my heart and
they punish the people who know.
Go out to the Hamula family.
Kind of people,
what's that?
They punish the people who know.
Right. So having said all that, one of the chapters that we've referenced in here before, it's one of the more popular things that that you've discussed since An Insider's View. We did talk about this in my last interview with you, was your meeting that you had, or your series of meetings that you had with an LDS General Authority from 2012 to 2014. So I'm saying all that because probably the most popular question I received for you was Elder Hamula that secret general authority? No. The timeline doesn't match, so we know the answer, but go ahead.
I had 8 meetings with this general authority, and I wasn't the only one in the room. There were 4 people in that room. One of them's here tonight, but he doesn't want to be identified because he's too close to the general authority and people could figure it out. But he had a meeting with Elder Humuli today. And he did not leave, supposedly because he didn't believe. But they know each other. And he's committed some kind of maybe a sex crime or something along those lines. And of course, he has the background, in my way of thinking, that he could defect. He's got a degree in philosophy and law and political science, and that's the humanities. And so I'll take my GA's word on that. But you know how they do it. If they can get you on adultery or some crime, they won't say you're disillusioned or apostasy. But apparently in his case, he is not. Although he was removed, I think. He was the 70 in charge of the correlation for 2014, 15, and 16. He had an apostle over that. But so we'll let that go as it is. But that's what they did to Simon Southerton. He defected, but they didn't talk about his apostasy. They talked about his mistake of adultery, and they focused on that. So this really puts Hamuli in a hole because he's vulnerable to whatever they say. And I wish he would speak out, but it doesn't sound like he's going to. But I don't know that. I hope he does.
From my understandings of how these things often work, once you reach a certain level in the church, you are entitled to a pension.
They took that away. They call it a stipend, but it's more than a stipend.
But are you saying Emeritus 70 don't have a retirement?
They do, but they took it away, is what my source says.
From who?
From Hamuli.
Hamuli lost his retirement, you're saying?
Well, they call it a stipend. I assume it's a retirement.
You're saying your general authority source claims that Hamuli lost
That's what he reported today.
His stipend.
And he doesn't think that Hamuli has 6 kids or something. He's not rich. So they have punished him. I don't know if he'll speak out. I wish he would. My guess is, I don't know. I'm not going to guess. I'm just saying what we know and what we don't know. But my GA, if you know what I mean by that, he says it's not because he lacked the faith. It's some kind of, I think his wife has given him a bad time, so I don't know. Of course, wives can give you a bad time for a lot of
So, regarding this general authority source of yours, will you ever leave record of who that was, even
No,
for 50 years hence?
I tried to get him to go on record like Leonard Arrington did and put it in my special collection papers, interview him, and 25 years later open it up. He wouldn't even do that. They just call him crazy. He has no reason to. Look, the church knows who he is. Let's get real here. But as long as he doesn't say anything, they're not going to out him. What's the advantage if he does? There's no advantage at all. And this is a high profile. He's been an area president, a temple president, a mission president, and he was a member of the first Quorum of 70. He's been around the block.
Is he on the stipend?
Yes, because he never squealed.
Okay, so that was one of the major questions. And again, check out Restoring Christ, the book, for that chapter and many other good ones. Let's switch to your, the first half of this book, as you mentioned, are writings on Jesus and Christianity.
Pages. There's actually more on Joseph Smith and Mormonism. And by the way, that's a little bit bothersome on my part that I didn't do it right. The title is all about Jesus. The back cover statements are largely about Jesus. I had a choice to add some stuff that you did, and I wish I would have, but I didn't have room. So people could get the impression this is just a book how to come to Jesus, but the raw edge research chapters are the big ones, 160 pages on Joseph Smith and Mormonism, and roughly 104 on Jesus. By the way, my chapter 10 on understanding the atonement, I think that's the best stuff I've ever written on it. I'm trying to make it reasonable. I don't know if people buy it, but it's as reasonable as I know how to get it.
How essential is a belief in both a historical Jesus, but also a resurrected Jesus and a atonement Jesus that bleeds from every pore for our sins, for questioning or doubting or post-Mormons that are still considering whether they want Christ to be part of their lives at all? How important are those sort of literal aspects of Jesus' ministry to you?
If you read the New Testament, you're a dead duck if you don't believe he's divine. I have a more hopeful view. 2 Peter is a very good statement. He says, now let me tell you what Jesus represents. He has these 9 qualities, and he lists them. He says, when you have those qualities inside you, you know Jesus Christ. So if you come to know him without thinking he's divine, and I think it might be, from my perspective, a little harder to do that, but if you do, I like to think that he's going to be generous in his grace with those people rather than harsh. That's my own personal belief, and I don't want to be struck down because that's his decision, not mine.
And what if somebody says, yeah, I don't think I can know whether he bled from every pore for my sins or even was resurrected? Would you still suggest that Jesus had a role for a doubting or a questioning or even a atheist or agnostic post-Mormon? And if so, what would that role be?
I'm not sure I understood that, John.
If somebody says, I don't think we can know whether Jesus bled from every pore to atone for our sins, I don't even know if Jesus existed, let alone resurrected from the dead. If somebody says to you, that stuff's not knowable, so if that's a requirement to have Jesus be a part of my life, I'm not interested. Could you respond with a case for why Jesus could be important to someone who's not interested in some of those more literal or materialistic claims?
My answer to that is religion gets too many passes on logic and reason, and if it's true, it's true. And there's no such thing as a separate set of truths for spiritual things and that, but we've fallen into that trap, and religion deserves a lot of the criticism they get. Maybe my answer would be turn to chapter 10, and I do it in a question-answer period, and you can get a flavor of what I'm trying to do to make the atonement of Christ
What part do you want me to read? Which question?
Question 3. Because
why did the Father will that Jesus be crushed with pain on the cross
that's
and
right
Gethsemane?
out of Isaiah 53:10. Because it's such a contradiction. I have a chapter in there of how I think the God of the Old Testament got a violent reputation. I think that's an important chapter myself, but I hope other people do as well. But just read that answer. That's my best effort at trying to make this as logical and reason.
Do you want me to read it now?
Yeah.
The epistle to the Hebrews informs us that Jesus learned from what he suffered. Some kinds of suffering can soften the heart, and in Jesus' case, it deepened his understanding, which perfected his judgment. While his suffering is evident during his ministry, it was on the cross and in Gethsemane that the Father allowed Jesus to experience the collective emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical burdens of humanity. This crushing experience changed Jesus and made him who he fully is.
It goes beyond the satisfaction, ransom, substitution theory, and all of that, which is totally inadequate to me to answer. This goes deeper, in my view. This is my answer. I don't know if people are going to buy it, but it's the best I can do.
Feeling the full measure of human sin, disease, pain, and suffering made Jesus more empathetic, forgiving, and magnanimous in judging all humankind, and to profoundly comprehend the tremendous weight of his responsibility. By descending below all things, Jesus became Christ, a perfect judge.
That's when it happened.
He could not have learned this from a book. This searing experience was indelibly engraved by the Father upon the character of Jesus forever. No wonder his final words, "It is finished," were uttered with a loud cry of agony from the cross. So what are you saying there?
I'm saying that his journey went right up to the very end. And that's why, I know you have to read the whole chapter to get the flavor, but the next question is, well, why did he do it? Why did he willing to suffer? And the easy answer is that the Father asked him to, frankly. But he pled with tears and crying to have that hour pass by him. He didn't want to do it. But Hebrews 12:2 is a better answer. He says, I endured the cross because of the joy it would bring humanity. Now there's love from a Christian point of view. When did he get these bestowal of this authority? After he visited the Father. He wouldn't allow Mary to hug him, remember? And she comes down. He says, now all power in heaven and earth has been given to me. And it goes from there.
We had a listener write in and ask, for those who want to use the New Testament to say that homosexuality is against God's law, what is your view on that position as a Christian?
I like the way the Pope answered it. We're all sinners, and let's not castigate certain sinners. Jesus never said one word about homosexuals that I'm aware of. LGBT. And that kind of stuff was really common in the Roman world. They were upfront about it.
Are you saying it's your position that being LGBT is a sin? Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying stop even pursuing that line of inquiry?
Probably.
Stop judging.
Probably stop. I mean, look, you go to the book of Leviticus, they used to say leave Leviticus alone because it's so crazy. There's all kinds of crazy things in there. If you don't like what your children did, stone them. But what we don't say is that it was the Father that had to throw the first stone, so there wasn't too many stonings. That's important. Same with the homosexuals, I don't know. I think that the key thing there is if they come this way, and I believe they do, this isn't not learned behavior. I don't believe that. But the church can't really tout that, can they? Because as soon as they say it's not a sin, then they're left high and dry in their arguments, in my opinion. So if it is a sin, I like the way the Pope dealt with it. And hey, let's fellowship them. Let's make their contribution. We're all sinners. We're all in this together. Let's not go out and isolate.
But it sounds like you're also open to the possibility that the Bible just gets a lot of things wrong, and that could be one of the things it gets wrong.
Well, what do they really know about this stuff? I mean, do they know any more than we do? They know less than what we knew about it. And I'm open on that.
Excellent. Do any of you have questions for Grant about Christianity? Please come up and form a line if you guys want. And I may throw a couple questions in here and there as well.
My question is about using the New Testament. You quoted a lot in that first part of your book. How do you reconcile some of the more disturbing things in the New Testament, specifically regarding the way women are treated, wives are treated, the misogyny?
Well, you have to understand that nobody was treated very well in the Roman world. I mean, only about 3% could even read or write. They're all slaves. So it isn't just that women get it, it's 97% of the Roman Empire gets it. I don't know if that's a cogent answer or not, but...
So with those passages saying women should stay silent in the church, you're saying that might not be from God either?
Well, Paul has... I have a chapter in there the consensus of who wrote these 27 books in the New Testament. And there is a difference of view on women. And one of them is definitely written by Paul, and the other is probably not written by Paul, but put in the words of Paul.
One listener asked, can you restore Christ and remain in the restoration? So can you remain LDS and restore Christ?
Sure, I've got daughters that feel very comfortable in the service of the Mormon church. I'm just asking them to change their Jesus. If they want to be a Mormon, so be it. I can't see it, but if they want to, change your Jesus. Get a better Jesus, because we got a better Jesus.
Upgrade your Jesus. Jesus 2.3.0.
And of course, this is why I emphasize this in the book, because 70% of the people who leave Mormonism have been bitten, and they don't want anything to do with authoritarian religion. So I don't know why they'd want to stay in the Book of Mormon. Jesus is, wow. I mean, that's where it really gets down and gritty. I don't know why anybody would want to worship that Jesus, but anyway.
Many have asked, do you attend a Christian church, or have you, and I know you talk about this in the book, especially in the final chapter called, what's next? Is that what it's called?
Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
What do you do when the narrative of your life burns down? Wow, that's a good one.
Dave, did you attend any Christian churches?
Oh, I've been to about half a dozen of them. I'm so old, I don't like guitars, but I found a few that would be very helpful. I really like the Community of Christ. These men had a burst of integrity, and they says, we're putting Jesus first and let the chips follow. If there's a disagreement between Jesus and Joseph, we go with Jesus, even though we're a restoration heritage. And they paid a price for that. They lost thousands of members. But they've stabilized and they're beginning to grow again, and they're very much a Christian church. You don't even have to believe in the Book of Mormon to be a Community of Christ member. But I admire them, and I like their model. But I have a relationship with Jesus Christ. He hasn't disappointed me. You've heard me say this before. But I think there's several churches you could feel comfortable with. Paul Roby has a South Mountain church. They talk about Jesus a lot. Mormons say, oh, so do we. Well, they've never been anywhere else. They think they do. And honestly, there are congregations, the bishop makes sure they do, and I applaud that. So it's not universal. But the LDS Church just lets Jesus fall through the cracks. They have such a smorgasbord of concerns. And C.S. Lewis, the lay Protestant theologian, addresses this. He says, if they're not focusing on Christ, they're missing the boat. So the LDS Church, from their perspective, they've got all these things. They got all these, the beauty of their theology and their standard works of the church, and they've got education and welfare and missionary and just all kinds of things. And pretty soon Jesus just falls through the cracks. One such person who visits me, he's finally quit paying tithing. He says, I've made a boatload of money, and I've given him enough money to build a major luxury house, but I'm not giving him any more. He says, I'm tired of the Jesus fast, he says. My ward doesn't talk about Jesus, and that's what I want to talk about.
One of the most popular questions we get for you is, have you applied the same level of scrutiny to Jesus in the Bible that you've applied to Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon and Mormonism?
Well,
or did you give Christ and Christianity a pass?
I don't think so. I think it would be true to say I had previously this book, but we get into some pretty good issues on this. I have a consensus of what most scholars would believe who wrote the 27 books. It's not 100% comforting, folks, but I don't think it's serious enough to throw anything out either. I think we're okay. How God got a violent reputation in the Bible, I think, is a very important chapter. I'll let the reader decide that when they read the book.
But this is your attempt to apply the same intellectual rigor to Christ in the New Testament that you've
More
applied.
so. It's mainly academic stuff. And remember, there are a few devotional pieces in there, I admit. All these chapters have been written since my 2 books came out, in The Incomparable Jesus and The Insider. But, you know, good minds. Malcolm Muggeridge was a Fabian socialist, and he came around to Christ at the end of his life. Brilliant editor of Punch magazine. C.S. Lewis, Thomas Aquinas, no dummy. So I think it's not that all religious people are inferior intellectually. They're not, in my view. Although too many people who run the churches think they get a pass, and they don't. They shouldn't. And they won't from me.
As I've interviewed you in the past, it seemed like your commitment to Christ is largely rooted in spiritual or emotional experiences or witnesses that you've received. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, except for one experience I had that goes way beyond that, but I won't get into that. The reason I'm a Christian is Jesus says, if this is his promise, if you take upon yourself these 9 qualities, and Peter, Paul, John, and Jesus all say the same basic list of 8 or 9 things, that my peace will be with you, my spirit will be with you, I will bring all things to remembrance in your hour of temptation, and you will see me, my guiding principle in my life. I will be alive in you. What I don't understand is why more people don't try the experiment, because that's what Jesus never, ever invited anyone to know him by a religious feeling alone. He never, ever does that. It's so different than the Mormon Jesus. You know the truth of all things by the Holy Ghost, Moroni 10. You don't get that at all. It's more of a empirical approach, but you have to make the first step.
What does that look like? So someone's post-Mormon, they're leaving the church.
That's why I'm a Christian. That's why I'm a Christian, because it works for me.
What are the steps a post-Mormon would take to find Jesus? Just high level, 5 steps.
Well, I would hope that they'd
read your book. Buy and read your book is step 1. Okay, what's step 2?
But to give Jesus a second chance.
Yeah.
They've thrown out everything.
Yeah, so what do they do to build it back? Give them some just starting points.
See the difference? The most cathartic experience I've had is to compare the Mormon Jesus with the Four Gospels Jesus, and that has helped me deal with things, separate things out.
So get to know the real Jesus, not the Book of Mormon Jesus.
So if you give Jesus a second chance and you realize this is what he stands for, these 8 or 9 qualities, and then take a little bit of leap of faith. Step out into the dark and the spotlight will follow. You have to make the move. It can be a small move, but swallow your pride and try it. It works.
Try what? Do you mean go to church? Do you mean read the scriptures every day?
Well,
what is it?
Well, people, they come home from their mission, they never read the New Testament again, and pretty soon weeds are between them and God, and they wonder why they're falling away and not believing.
So read his holy book. What? Any other steps? Attend a church?
I think a church can definitely help. I'm engaged enough, no, but there's lots of people that could benefit from
and I'm guessing you would just say live it.
But you've got to make a move.
What do you mean make a move?
I mean you have to step out and have a little bit of faith that he's going to come through on the promises. He says, my grace will transform you and help you achieve these qualities if you will let me. I will become alive in you. Try the experiment. He's very much into experiments. He's not into feelings. And
so live his word, you're saying. Live his word.
Try it. You'll like it. That's
and
what
your soul will enlarge in with the Spirit.
Well, he's promised these blessings and his grace will transform you. And then he specifically, he says, look, you need to be born again. And these 9 qualities is basically born again. And when you do that, I will become alive in you. That's my promise to you as Christians. As a Christian, I can say it happened. I can't tell you what to do. I'm just saying, maybe swallow a little bit of pride and try the experiment.
And is there a chapter where those 9 qualities are listed?
Yeah, the born again saint.
Born again saint, page 25, chapter 3. I want to find, and I just want to read these off. Oh, they're not there. Where are they?
Oh, they're after the Beatitudes. Look, Jesus.
What? 45?
Yeah.
29. Be diligent in the ministry, exercise self-discipline, do what is right. Are these them?
Yeah. Just basically
forgive others beyond what justice requires. Be pure in heart and honest to us and others. Be a peacemaker. Return good from evil. Diligence in revealing his Father's divine nature. Strong faith in God. Virtuous behavior. Knowledge of the Scriptures. Temperance, meaning self-control, moderation, and balance. Patience with others. Godliness or goodness. Brotherly kindness or gentleness. Enormous charity, love, and compassion for those fellow beings.
And what does Peter say there? When these qualities are inside you, you know Jesus Christ.
So pursue those qualities, and Christ will enlarge in your soul.
That's my experience.
Okay. All right. That's the recipe. All you skeptics out there, you now have been served by Grant Palmer. Do what he says. It's in the book, chapter 3.
But I'm the first to admit there's things in the New Testament that are not that generous. It's not my call, it's his, but I just like to think in his grace he's going to be more willing than some of our ministers.
So for you, if a Hindu dies never knowing Christ, for you there's...
Well, I don't know. I don't want to get too far out on that. I don't know. That's his call, not mine. I just know it works for me, but you got to have a little modicum of faith. Now, down in the Salt Lake County Jail, those men are driven. I've worked there for 13 years, and he walks the halls of the jails and prisons of this world. He doesn't just hang out in temples. And if they showed that, this is what I learned about my boss down there. You show that much willingness to change, He's there. That's what I learned. And I quit being so judgmental. It's shaped who I am. And they're driven to Christ. Their parents have given. They've gone to high school counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists. Nothing worked. That's why they're in jail. And they're literally driven to seek the mind of Christ, as Paul would say. And their parents have abandoned them, and that's not always a bad idea. Because as long as they have their crutch, they'll use it. And they have to get really down low. And that's when some of them start making more mature decisions. And the problem with that is that they got 4 or 5 fires to put out. You and I got 1 or 2. And they're so habituated that they like to change. But their habits make it very, very hard. That's why the recidivism rate is so high.
Okay, I want to sort of close by talking about maybe the most sensitive sort of questions of all. Grant, tell us, you joked with me about your complexion when we had lunch recently. What did you basically say about your own complexion?
My kids think I look like a yellow neon tube and a prisoner of Treblinka.
Okay, what's going on with the yellow? What is that?
That goes into the yellow or in the liver. My doctor and nurse tells me that will continue. I'll get more yellow and get weaker and weaker. I don't have pain yet. The tumor grows. Tumors are very greedy. They demand their share of the food. And as it gets bigger, it depends where it grows. It will depend on the pain. You go on morphine, you go into a coma, and you go to sleep. That's not too bad.
And this strikes close to home for me because my sister Gina was diagnosed with colon cancer in October, and I noticed an ashen complexion then, and she was gone in December. So it was a 2-month sort of time period. And my sense is you're on a similar time period. Is that right?
Yeah, they're talking 2 months. They gave me 3 months, up to 12 weeks, and I've been through 5 of those weeks, so you can figure it out from there. I'm okay.
So this
I've had an overpouring of love. I've been working right up to this day. As the Beatles used to say, and I've repeated this, get a little help from your friends, and you're my friends. And I had far more friends that I have, and this guy right here is an incredible supporter of me. Incredible. He's been there all the way. And I appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, thank you. You know, when I talk about 2000, 2001, your book was really, 2002 is when your book came out, right? Your book was a really central part of helping us really make sense of what we were reading elsewhere. But back to you. Thank you for that. So you're staring death in the face. How does that feel? How are you experiencing it? What are you thinking?
I don't fear the future. I look forward to the adventure. I think we're going to learn a lot. It's new. I like to think in 2 months I'll be younger and more energy.
What do you think the other side is going to be like? What are you going to be doing over there?
Well,
do you have any theories, speculation, wishes?
I think the Mormons are going to need a lot of counseling over there.
So it's like reverse spirit prison with Grant Palmer as teacher.
I really, well, psychologists too.
Oh,
maybe you can help out.
No time soon.
But there's one big job, because they're going to have major adjustments to find out that this system that they are so sure is true isn't anywhere close. And maybe we're all wrong. I don't know. Maybe we're being observed from a maze or something, and this is all part of... I think about that once in a while. It's a little problematic.
So you've been a teacher for most of your life. It sounds like you hope to continue teaching.
I do, and I think I'll be a much better teacher.
I also, as we talked outside your front door when I dropped you off when we had lunch this last time, you spoke to me fondly about your gardening and your birds. Do you have any theories around that or hopes?
Well, I think we'll all get a little plot. It's like whether Adam and Eve were literal or metaphorical is probably whatever. Doesn't matter. Well, I won't say that. But even if it isn't, if it's metaphorical, so be it. Anyway.
Plot of land.
I think it says they dressed and keeped it. I like to think that one of the things we're going to focus on is to dress and keep this little plot we're going to be given. And there's a great deal of joy in certain things. I love my flower gardens. I don't have energy to take care of them anymore, but I had my racing pigeons. I had parakeets that during the summer I'd take the panels off, and it's like a garden of paradise around there. You could hear these birds all over the yard. And of course, I've seen much of the world in my travels, and I really do believe The World is the best book. And I like to quote W.C. Fields, the comedian. Why this life is so difficult, it's a wonder anyone gets out of it alive.
Well, it sounds like a beautiful vision. I hope it comes true for you. And, man, it'd be fun to see on the other side. So,
we will.
Yeah?
I'm pretty confident about that. Went to lunch with Draper. He probably doesn't want to know this, but he came away from the pastor who introduced us. He says, it puts me to shame that Palmer really, it's humility to me that he doesn't have these problems of whether we live or not. Now, I've said this before, and I'll just briefly say it again. I have a philosophy degree, and I can argue with the best of them. We don't know for certain. But like my friend Richard Russell said, who wrote a dust cover statement, he says, if it all goes dark, I won't know. If I'm around, I'll be joyous and grateful. That's the philosophical argument. The religious argument I've given you tonight, and I've had enough experiences that it just seems natural to me. I just can't believe this is the end of human personality. If it is, it's such a tremendous waste of time, isn't it?
All right. So to conclude, I think it would be cool if whoever wants to can come up and give a super brief question or even a brief comment or thank you to Grant, just to give him a sense for what he's meant to us.
This has gone on long enough. Nobody's going to listen to it, John.
Yeah, nobody listens to long podcasts, right? This is short. This is a short one. What are you talking about?
It actually is. Yeah.
Anybody want to give some final thank you or final comment, note of appreciation to Grant? Just make a little line. Let's give him a little love as a way to close.
Oh, I feel the love. You don't need to pour that on.
I have some
beyond
love to
my
give.
wildest expectations. I had no idea this would be the response, and literally thousands of emails, whatever.
Well, get ready for some more, because here it comes. I listened to your podcast together. It was the week of the Mayan calendar, I believe, predicted the end of the world. And that was the very night that I was listening to you. And I had my shelf, and you were the straw that broke that shelf. It sent me into faith crisis. Thanks a lot for that.
You have to unfreeze people before you refreeze them. That's what Mormon missionaries do. They say, you don't have any authority in your churches in apostasy, but we have good news. We have a restoration.
The irony is that I so appreciated your view on Christ, and I had studied in BYU Jerusalem and had this wonderful academic background to know the reliability of the Bible. So I turned to the Bible more seriously and saw this, what you're talking about, this comparison between a Mormon concept of Jesus and a biblical view of Jesus. I ended up going to another church, gave myself to the Lord. My wife and I, we have a blended family. We're a big Brady Bunch group. We have 10 kids. We have all come out together. And I just wanted to thank you. Sorry, very Mormon of me to start crying and getting emotional, but I wanted to thank you. My pastor told me that the gospel is so simple you can summarize it in 9 words. We're all sinners.
And we should.
We're all sinners. He is perfect. Make a trade. And I want to thank you for leading me in that direction.
Just real quickly, Grant, when I first started questioning the church, the Insider's View of Mormon Origins was something I could go to because it was written by an institute director. And I'll never forget the confidence I had in what you wrote and how it impacted me and made me come to the realization that the church wasn't true. And I just want to thank you.
I'm glad I did. You've made a major contribution in your podcast as well.
Well, thank you, Grant, and I enjoyed interviewing you as well. But you had a great impact on me and your book, and I felt comfortable going to it because I was reading a Mormon at the time, and that meant a lot. So thanks.
You're welcome. This is my cousin Zinda. Maybe I shouldn't say that.
That's okay. I just want to let you know, Grant, that I've really appreciated our phone calls, and you really helped me a lot. And I will miss you when you're gone. I'll cry, and I don't cry often when people leave this earth, but I will cry when you leave. Love you.
I'm worried about myself. The closer I get to death, I'm getting a little more emotional. I'm afraid I'm becoming a histrionic.
We have time for maybe 3 more.
I just also wanted to thank you for having the courage to write an Insider's Guide to Mormon Origins, because it was it's kind of been my Book of Mormon to hand out to the people that have come to me, the few people that have come to me since in the 10 or so years since we've been out. But that was always a catalyst, but also something I felt comfortable in sharing with people that were just on their beginning of their journey. And, like you said, when your foundation kind of burns to the ground, and I was going to ask you this, so maybe it's a question too, but do you feel like having that happen or having things kind of fall apart, the belief that you grew up with, did it?
Well, I was extremely Orthodox. I had a great uncle, Charles H. Hart, who's First Quorum of 70 in the 20s and the teens, and my parents were socially friends with Bruce and Amelia McConkie, Joseph Fielding Smith and his wife, knew Harold B. Lee. I was true blue. Our mission led the world in 1962 in convert baptisms, and I was very much a part of that. I was one of these missionaries that came home. I didn't have earrings in my ears 2 weeks later. I went into CES. I was serious about this.
Well, I've felt like, my life is so much better since, even though everything came crashing down, things have become so much brighter.
And almost everybody says that.
And that's what I was going to ask.
Mormons can't believe that, but it's the testimony of most of the people I hear about.
So thank you for that and for your help in that.
You may have been asked this question before, but I'm wondering if, because of the amount of research that you've done and the background that you have, I'm wondering if you can give us kind of an idea of what you see the next 15, 20 years of Mormonism being?
Well, I think John's got a better answer to that. He's the one that interviews all these people. And John is doing a great service. He's documenting what's going on in people's lives. This will become a very important, and already has, historical record. And you need to know that and support him for this reason alone. Now, as for the crystal ball stuff, I like to think that Mikhail Gorbachev come up through the ranks of the KGB, and as he stepped up the mountain and saw that they were becoming a third world country, that he made some changes. And whoever's in charge in 15 to 20 years from now, when the church, when it's no longer to their advantage, when there's a tipping point, and this is going through every family in the church like diarrhea, and it's in the trenches. They just know about it. It's not, oh, have you heard about this? They seem to know that when they realize that it's maybe in their best interest to get past this and be open, and and I know that according to my general authority, President Uchtdorf is trying to lead the church out of this mess, but he's a junior apostle, and I don't have a crystal ball, but I think that they're growing in certain parts of Africa, Asia, Europe, even in the United States, they're losing market share. But I like to think that they will eventually not only allow the true history to be written in a more definitive manner, but I think they ought to do what the RLDS Church has done, and I advocated that from the beginning. Move to Christ and quit talking about all the glories of Mormonism and Joseph Smith. They had so much more money and members that they're not willing to do that, are they? Like Community of Christ. But the Community of Christ, in my opinion, made the right decision on this. And they did it with a burst of integrity. And I admire that. I really do. I think you should chime in on that. Question.
Is that a command?
Yeah. Well, nobody knows.
This is a non-satisfactory answer, but I saw one of the best movies I've seen in the past decade is called Spotlight. How many of you have not seen Spotlight? How many of you have not seen it? How many of you have seen it? Okay. Go see Spotlight if you haven't seen it. And what it shows is that religion is incredibly resilient. Because if you can have systemic pedophilia where a very large percentage of your entire ecclesiastical force is systematically not only sexually abusing children, but also covering it up and perpetuating it across multiple decades, across multiple continents. And if your church can do that, and your church can continue to grow and thrive, what that means is that religion is very resilient.
Very.
How many of you have not seen Going Clear? Okay, go see it. And what you'll see there is that Scientology, the buildings are empty, but Scientology has more money than it's ever had because it realized that once it got a bunch of money, if you remember the quote from L. Ron Hubbard, if you want to get rich, start a business. If you want to get really rich, start a religion. So once they obtained all that money, now they're just investing it. And Scientology is diminishing in terms of membership, but they're growing in terms of their wealth and their power. And our church is taking same pages out of the same playbook. I just saw it announced recently that the church is buying another $1 billion+ investment in Texas, and the commercial real estate investments continue to thrive.
To finance the third world missionary labors, I suppose.
And, the church owns 2% of Florida, et cetera. So the church is probably going to get richer.
But it's sinking.
It's
Florida.
But I don't think that the LDS church is going to disappear anytime soon. I think it's going to continue slowing in its growth. It's going to top out. And I think within 30 or 40 years, we'll start to see a decline in membership in the developed world. I think it'll continue investing in the third world, and it'll be able to do a numbers game where we grow in the third world while we're shrinking in the U.S. and in Western Europe and in parts of Asia. But to be honest, I don't think the church is going anywhere. I do think that you can, if there's one thing that's reliable about the church, is that it's 30 years behind the rest of the developed world in social progress. So we will make progress with women and with LGBT people. It'll just be about 30 years from now, long after everybody else has sort of mass adopted any progress.
Big churches don't die, they change if they're going to survive.
So the church will adapt and thrive.
They'll adapt.
Honestly, they're just waiting for enough old people to die out so that the pain of making a change is diminished, and they'll counter that with trying to save the younger generations. So I'm not draconian in my predictions about the church. I do think it's continuing to lose its most thoughtful, informed, educated, wealthiest, best and brightest, as Marlon Jensen. That will continue to happen. The brain drain, the integrity drain. And that's good. That's good for me, because it turns out those are my favorite people in the world, are people who used to be Mormon and now they're not, and they're fun to hang out with.
They
so
still
I'm really
get a lot
happy.
of doctors who stay in it. They get a lot of prestige being, a doctor in the ward. But the brain drain as well on the teachers, the speakers, the thinkers. They're leaving.
Yeah.
The analyticals.
And so I'm super happy about organizations like WACA and, Oasis and a lot of cool Facebook communities. I'm just so thrilled to see post-Mormons and other ex-religious people finding dear friendships, finding community, and learning how to thrive where Mormonism is largely just in the rearview mirror. And I see that as a growing industry of beautiful people making dear friendships and having a lot of fun together. And that's the projection that I want to leave you with, if I'm going to leave you with the projection.
Yeah. And I think, I have different religious and political views in my family, but my family's pretty open and mature, and we've transcended it with love. And I hope you have that gift, because there can be some nasty relationships between sisters and parents, and I'm fortunate to be leaving, and that's not a problem. If anyone has a really strong view as to what they think is going to happen in 25 years, I'd like to hear it if we have time.
You're the boss.
I liked Richard Bushman, and I reported this in a Sunstone session a year ago, that the Mormon Church cannot sustain its current narrative. Boy, that says volumes. So they've got to morph if they're going to live. And he's their top apologist, and I think he's right on the money. He backed off of that, but he said it, and it's true. A little bit. Anyone have anything, what they...
Let the speculation.
Yeah, where do you see where things going in 20, 30,
I'll keep
40
it
years?
brief. I don't really have much to say, but I think with the thought of truth being independent of belief and indifferent to the amount of people who believe in it, and with the idea that truth is difficult to obtain, but much more difficult to unobtain. I think we will continue to come closer to it for the rest of humanity. So,
well, we got a phenomenon.
Are you saying the truth will advance nobly and bravely until it's penetrated every continent? Is that what you're saying? All right.
And if you're willing to put truth as a higher virtue than loyalty to tradition, you're vulnerable to leave. You are vulnerable to leave.
I think I told you this, Grant, a couple days ago. Last week I did a tour through the new MTC in Provo, and I was shocked when I got through. It's basically devoid of restoration, first vision, pretty much Joseph Smith, golden plates. It's very Christ-centered in the paintings, and I don't know if the missionary discussions have changed equally, but the video that they showed people that toured had nothing about the first vision or golden plates or anything with the restoration. And as a missionary from 35 years ago, I was actually shocked. So I think they will adapt. I was a journalist. I cover the church, and I think they're very slow and hard to change. But it's like any living organism; they want to live and survive. So, but I was shocked with what the new MTC had in it, at least the parts they showed us.
Thanks. Well, thanks for those comments. Thank you for coming, and I appreciate it.
Our pleasure, and lots and lots of love sent to you from those out on the internet. And I'll just read a couple final things. Mindy writes, "Thank him for me. I appreciate all his efforts, and I've always enjoyed his style of writing. May he rest in peace always when his time draws ever closer." She says, "Great family. His son is our bishopric. Amazing son he raised." So there's a shout out for a son of yours.
They're Orthodox. I got one in the bishopric. One just released as bishop, and one, my daughter's husband just released, and the other one is released Saudi president. So they're quite devout, except for my son here, his wife, who've seen the light.
Eliza writes, "Thank you for being authentic and sharing the quest." And then I'll end with Michelle's thank you, and then I'll ask you all to join me in a round of applause for Grant as we close with this one comment from Michelle. No, it's not from Michelle. It is, just one second. I had a really good thank you to close with. Oh my goodness, that's anticlimactic. Give me one more second here. I thought there was a really good comment to end with. Oh, there it is. "Please thank Grant profusely for all that he's done. Words can't express how much he's helped us." So I wanted to end with that thank you. And would you please join me in giving Grant our thanks for all he's given us? Thank you for joining us today on Mormon Stories Podcast. To keep this podcast alive, please consider a tax-deductible donation today by becoming a monthly subscriber at mormonstories.org. Audio and video for this podcast were provided by Richard Holdman. A big thanks to the Saber Rattlers for providing the music for today's episode. The Mormon Stories logo was generously donated by StudioCase.com.
Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way.